Welcome to the Physician Wealth Med podcast. It's wealth medicine for doctors. If you're a doctor and you have no time, it looks like you found us just in time. This podcast is for all doctors who would like to work on their personal wealth, but do not have traditional hours to do so because they have no time. We're here to jump into topics that will help you address your wealth both inside and outside of your practice so that you can live the life of significance you're dreaming of. You'll hear from your peers, you'll hear from industry professionals, and your host and wealth advisor, me, Kevin Sullivan. This is your time. Now let's get started with today's podcast. Welcome to another episode of Physician Wealth Meds. We say it's wealth medicine for doctors. We're so glad you joined us today. We have a very special guest, Dr. Jordan Grumet, who is going to be our special guest today. So thankful that you're taking the time to join us today to share with us about your insights and what you do on purpose. There's no pun intended there, and I'll get to that in just a minute, but I so appreciate you joining our podcast today.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, thank you. Let me just tell you a little bit about Jordan. He was born in Illinois, and he found the spark to become a doctor after deeply a personal event reshaped his life's trajectory. The unexpected loss of his father, an oncologist, ignited a passion within him to practice medicine and instilled a unique vantage point that later worked seamlessly with financial expertise. And this helped him to explore profound notions like wealth, abundance, and financial independence with thoughtful and a critical lens. Completing his studies at the University of Michigan, Jordan earned his medical degree from Northwest University before embarking on a journey to internal medicine, and presently he serves as an associate medical director. With profound understandings of both medicine and finance, Jordan focuses on financial independence and wellness, and his passion started the launch of his Earn and Invest podcast in 2018. So obviously he's a fellow podcaster, and we love that. And in 2019, he was honored with the Plutus Award for Best New Personal Finance Podcast, followed by consecutive nominations for Best Personal Finance Podcast of the Year in 2020 and 2021. In August of 22, he wrote his first book, Taking Stock, a hospice doctor's advice on financial independence, building wealth, and living a regret-free life. In his second book, The Purpose Code, have it right here, came out in January of 2025, and you won't want to miss this, and you want to read it on purpose. I can tell you that. And whether you're in the medical profession or not, this book, you got to get your hands on that. It's a very good read. It makes so much sense. And in full disclosure, I just wanted to let you know that I was so impressed and inspired by your keynote address that you did that's posted on your website. I just went out to your website and I watched the whole thing. I couldn't shut it off. I was going through that, and you just resonated with me, because how many times do we try to find purpose and it just feels like another crack in the sidewalk? How do you get there? What do you call it? What's the meaning and all of that? And I was just so moved by it. So touch on some of those points too, as well as we go through this podcast today. Tell us about your background and where you are now.
Thank you so much for having me. Basically, I was 7 years old. I idolized my father. He was an oncologist, and he went to round at the hospital one day, got a severe headache, and collapsed and died. He had a cerebral aneurysm. And being 7 years old, I figured somehow that was my fault, right? 7-year-olds think everything basically has to do with them. So I thought I must not be enough. I must not be special enough. I must not be worthy enough. And the story I eventually told myself is I could solve this whole issue, this trauma of my childhood, by just becoming a doctor like my dad. I could walk in his footsteps. It would solve everything. And then I'd be able to save people's lives, and it would be wonderful. And that became pretty much my purpose and identity as a kid. I wasn't interested in money. I wasn't interested in financial independence. I just wanted to be a doctor. And that wish carried me through all sorts of hardship. I had a learning disability. My mom remarried. I changed high schools and didn't know a single soul. When I was in college, I would spend all weekend studying while all my friends were basically going to the football games. I was sitting on Saturday morning in the law library, just trying to become the doctor I wanted to be. Lo and behold, I got there, practiced for a number of years, and burned out, and realized that becoming a doctor didn't bring my father back. It didn't fix the problem of my childhood. Furthermore, I couldn't save all these lives, as you well know some patients get sick and they just die or you can't fix them.
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking for a way out. I eventually discovered financial independence. I was incredibly lucky. This guy named Jim Dolly, the White Coat Investor, wrote this wonderful book and he sent it to me. I was writing a medical blog at the time and he wanted me to review it for my blog. So I read this book. It taught me what financial independence was. I realized that I was most of the way there. I eventually slowly left medicine and started doing things that lit me up, like writing books and podcasting. And I decided that I wanted to still do some medicine, but not everything. And the piece of medicine I liked was hospice and palliative care. So I had started doing it almost as a side hustle. And I loved it. And so I wrote my first book about what the dying could teach us about money and life. And a key part of that principle was that we should be putting purpose first before we build our financial framework. And interestingly enough, I went to promote this book. I went to conferences and people kept asking me, you keep on saying, find your purpose. Well, I have no idea how to do that. In fact, I don't think there is a purpose. And so I dove deep into the data about purpose and eventually end up writing the purpose code to kind of solve that basic question, that problem. People hear about purpose all the time, but they don't really know how to pursue it. And so I wanted to make that really clear.
You're spot on. Okay, if you're listening to this podcast, he just said a lot in just a few minutes. Talk about purpose before wealth. Explain that a little bit.
Well, so I had been dealing with my dying patients and I would be hearing their deathbed regrets and they would talk about everything but money. No one ever said, I wish I worked more nights and weekends. No one ever said, well, my net worth only made it to $500,000, but I really wish I made it to $1 million. They all started talking about things like, I really wish I had the energy, courage, and time to, and then fill in the blank. Like for one person that was writing a book. For another person, it was building a boat. For another person, it was reconnecting with someone in their life that they had lost track with. And so I started to realize is people had these regrets and it had everything to do with things like purpose and identity, and it had very little to do with money. And so I started thinking about the young people. I was doing the Earn and Invest podcast, and I was interviewing all of these authors and these entrepreneurs and these 7-figure business people, and they could tell me all about how to make money. But when I asked them, well, what does enough money look like? Or what is this all in service for? I got a lot of blank looks. And so I started thinking that our young people really could learn from the dying. And this piece they could really learn is you got to have an idea of who you are and what you want first. And then let's build a sane financial framework around that so that you don't have to wait till someday. And you certainly don't have to wait till a doctor like me is walking into your hospital room and telling you you're dying to start working on the things that are really important to you.
It's foundational, right? That's the foundation that you could build everything else on. I know when you were giving your talk at the keynote address, you talked about I am and then fill in the blanks. So talk to us about the I ams.
So basically, my main premise, or there are two premises of that book, Taking Stock, my first book, the one that came before the Purpose Code. And the first premise was that purpose, identity, and connection should come first before we build our financial framework. And then the second premise was that there are multiple paths to financial independence. So let's look at that first premise, purpose, identity, and connections. We just talked a little bit about purpose. In my second book, I go more in depth, but a really quick way to start thinking about purpose is to imagine you're on your deathbed and asking yourself that question. If I found out I was going to die next week, what would I really regret never having the energy, courage, or time to do? And that can be a precursor. It can be an anchor for what we want to start building purpose around. Well, that was the purpose part, but identity and connections are also a big part of what should come before our finances. And so a lot of people, just like purpose, ask me, well, how do I know what my identity is? And so I tell people to ask yourself the question, say the statement, I am, and then fill in the blank. Now, the first time we do this, the answer we get often isn't satisfying. Like me, I was burning out in medicine, but when I first did this exercise, I am. And of course, the first thing that came out of my mouth was, I am a doctor, which was very superficial. It was what I was doing for a living, but it wasn't who I was. For some people, it might be who they are, but it wasn't for me. And so I had to keep asking that question. The second time I asked, I got a little bit better, but it was more definitional stuff like family relationships. I'm a father, I'm a son, I'm a spouse, all very true, but not unique to me. And so I kept going further. I am. And when I dug even further, I started getting closer. I started thinking about achievements. Like I'm the Plutus Award winner for the Earn and Invest podcast. This was closer, but not exactly there. But after doing this for a while, I finally came up with I am a podcaster, a writer, a public speaker. this felt more like who I was on the inside, and it all coalesced into I am a communicator. And so I suggest for other people to start doing this exercise to really get in touch with what they really connect with. Because a lot of times we live our life and we don't do that. We're told from a young age what we should do to make a living and what career we should pursue. And a lot of times that's someone else's version of purpose and identity they're putting on us, just like whether he meant to or not. When my dad died young, his version of identity became mine. But at some point we have to start questioning and asking, well, does that identity really fit us? And for me, it didn't. And I was kind of going through the world as a doctor, but I didn't have a lot of doctor friends, and I hated hanging out in the doctor's lounge. And one of the big things that really hit me hard is my wife and I would go to parties and meet new people, and I'd be so embarrassed to tell them what I did for a living, which was crazy because being a doctor is such a respectable thing. Why it felt bad is that this identity I was wearing on the outside of being a doctor didn't really fit that identity on the inside of being a communicator. And that's how I knew that I needed a change. I needed to start acting out that real identity that was on the inside. And so that's kind of a way we can start thinking about not just how we figure out purpose, but how we start thinking about things like identity too.
I'm going to ask you a loaded question. Do you think perhaps there are other doctors that feel the same way?
That's not a loaded question at all. There are many doctors who feel burnt out, who feel exhausted, or even who have hit success and they're 40 or 50 and they're saying, is this all there is? Like, I know how to do this doctor thing, and I either like it or I'm tired of it, but I'm looking at my life and saying, well, maybe this is not the whole of who I am. So I think it's a very common question, actually.
Yeah. It's almost like drinking ginger ale out of a Pepsi can, thinking that you're showing to the world is Pepsi, but it's really ginger ale inside. You know, it's that type of thing where who am I on the inside? And you talk a lot about the calling. Some people are definitely called to be that, and they can love and live in that type of environment. But there's a host of medical professionals, doctors, that just feel like they did that just because, and maybe it's not all cracked up to be what it was supposed to be for their purpose and their calling. What is the mindset that a doctor would have to start thinking about, is this really who I am?
Well, the truth of the matter is a lot of people go into a lot of professions and you don't really know what it is until you get there. And one of two things can happen. One is it can just not be what you thought it was. Like, my conception of what being a doctor was very much colored by that guilt and that trauma of my father dying. So obviously it was never going to be that, even though that was the impetus for me deep down inside to go into it.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we get there and it's either not what we thought it would be, or we change. So something that serves us earlier in life stops feeling like it's serving us. And so the real question and the real mindset comes down to courage. A lot of people, when it comes to purpose and identity, they'll give you every reason why I don't have enough money to start thinking about what I really want. Like, I have to stay being a doctor because that's what makes money. Or I don't have enough time. I'm so busy with my 8 to 6 or 9 to 5. I'm working all the time. I'm on call all the time. So I just don't have time to start thinking about it. But the truth of the matter is, one thing I learned from my dying patients is you have to live with a sense of what they call memento mori, this idea that we should carry the idea that we're constantly dying with us during life. Because we don't know how long we have on this earth, time is pretty precious, and you can't buy it. You can't sell it. You can't modify it. Time pretty much passes no matter what you do. So the only thing you can control is what activities you keep yourself busy with as time passes. Right. And so the mindset really is one of courage and one of realizing that our time is limited. If this is not filling you up and you're spending 90% of your time doing it, maybe it's time to start thinking about how I could start changing so that I'm spending a little bit less time doing this thing that no longer serves me. And I'm filling that space in with some things that do serve me. And so it's this matter of realizing we all want to win the game. And winning the game basically is filling that time with as much purposeful, enjoyable, wonderful stuff as possible and getting rid of as much stuff you loathe. And so if you're in the middle of your medical career and realizing you're not loving how you're spending your time, it behooves you to start improving that. Maybe that means changing professions within your career, right? Maybe you're a surgical oncologist. Maybe you want to become an in-office oncologist. Maybe you're a general surgeon and maybe you want to transfer just to wound care. So some of it might be just switching within your profession. For other people, it might be much more drastic. Maybe you're a physician, but you actually like running the medical practice and you're much more administrative. Maybe it's time you let go of some of those clinical hours and started doing some more of those administrative hours. Maybe you're an entrepreneur. Maybe you're interested in medical inventions. Maybe it's time to step away from some of your clinical practice to start building that company you always dreamed of. So those pivots don't have to be drastic and immediate. But we've got to really think about how do we win the game? How do we fill that time with as much appealing stuff as possible? And how do we get rid of that stuff we don't like? It means change, and change is always hard.
It is hard. So what would you think for a doctor to say, maybe today's the day, because I've been thinking about this, maybe today's the day I'm just going to take 5 minutes and just do the I am exercise and see how far you can drill it down. This is who I am. I'm a communicator. I'm a podcaster.
Believe it or not, I think if you're stuck in this place and you're like, I know something's wrong and I'm kind of exhausted by practice, or at least I don't want to fill my time here, as opposed to doing the identity exercise, I actually suggest we jump into some purpose exercises.
Yeah.
And specifically, people always tell me I don't know how to find my purpose. And I always tell people, you don't find your purpose, you build it. It's a very active thing. But you do have to understand some beckonings, some whisperings, some things that light you up so you can build a life of purpose around it. I call these purpose anchors. So what I actually tell people really, I suggest is you feel stuck in life. Let's start trying to figure out what your purpose anchors are. What are those things that light you up? And then we can start building a life of purpose around it. Believe it or not, the I am portion actually comes from action, and purpose is all about action in the present and future. So as opposed to doing that I am exercise, a lot of times let's start looking for those purpose anchors. Let's start building some purpose in your life, and that will define who you become, believe it or not. You might define yourself right now as a doctor, but when you do these exercises to figure out your purpose anchors, and let's say you decide you love writing, it's those activities around writing that you start taking that help redefine who you are.
Doctors, if you're hearing this today, you might want to be taking notes. Beautiful thing about the podcast is you can rewind, you can play this over, you can watch it again. I've always said that with every step you take, the scenery changes, and you may not be able to see it yet. It's like a video game. If you're on level 1, I hate to talk about a video game, but think about what our kids and grandkids are doing. They get to level 1, then they can go to level 2, but you don't see level 2 scenery at level 1. You got to get through it. So what would you say to a doctor that would say, okay, I'm just really thinking about this. So this podcast came at a really good time for me. What would be the next step where you would encourage that doctor to do?
So I lay a lot of this out in the purpose code, but I think the next step really, I think there are a few steps. One is to look at your finances and just figure out where you are. That never hurts. Like, how am I doing financially? Do I have money in the bank? Am I on my way to retirement? What are kind of my needs? That's one side. But the other side is to look at the purpose code and start trying to build some of those purpose anchors. So I really give about 4 or 5 strategies for trying to figure out what your purpose anchors are so that you can then build a life purpose around them. We talked about one, which is kind of like the regrets of the dying. I call this a regret audit. If you can imagine what you would regret on your deathbed if you hadn't achieved it yet, well, we can turn that around and turn regret into a purpose anchor. Since you're not dying, maybe you can start building a life purpose around that. For me, that was writing a book. I knew years before when I did this actual exercise, I said, boy, if I died and I hadn't traditionally published a book, I would really regret it. Well, boom, I could turn that around, and that became a purpose anchor, and I could build the life of purpose around it. Then I had to do the hard work, which was get an agent, come up with ideas, all those kind of things. But the first thing was to know what the purpose anchor was. The regret audit is a really easy exercise. Another one is the joys of childhood. I always tell people, what had lit you up as a kid? What were the posters in your room? What were the drawings? How did you keep yourself busy before you got so enthralled in school and career and all those kind of things? And that often can be a purpose anchor. I know when I was a little kid, I loved to collect baseball cards. I'm still excited by that today, even though I'm kind of busy. I don't have time for it. But if I was ever looking for purpose in my life, that would be a great place to go. Another easy one is what I call the art of subtraction. Look at your job, and let's say you don't love your job, but write down the 12 or 15 roles and responsibilities within that job. Scratch away everything you don't like and see what's left. For me, when I looked at everything I didn't like about being a doctor, the one thing that I liked that was left was hospice work. And I realized I'd do that even if I wasn't being paid for it. So that became a purpose anchor. And last but not least, if those 3 exercises don't work, I always tell people the spaghetti method: throw a bunch of spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. Try a bunch of new things. Say yes to people you normally don't say yes to. Put yourself in a little bit of an uncomfortable position for a few hours. Try something new and see if you like it. And if you are excited at the end of that day, that might be a purpose anchor for you too.
That's excellent. Because if you do this, the future self that you're going to be someday is going to thank you for it. Yeah.
Now we know what those purpose anchors are, and we can start building some activities around them. I want to write a book. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, maybe I'll hire a writing coach. But now I've really created this situation where I was kind of not winning the game because I was filling all my time being a physician. I wasn't enjoying it, and I wasn't using those hours well. But now I've identified one purpose anchor, and I've come up with one action related to the purpose anchor, which is I'm going to hire a writing coach to get better at writing. And now some of that time, maybe I was being a doctor. Some of that time I was wasting at home doing nothing. I'm going to be working with a writing coach. And so I've exchanged some time that wasn't being well utilized for some time doing something really purposeful. And so I've just begun to win the game, just by a little bit, right? Yeah. Well, what if you do that over and over again and build more of these purposeful activities in your life and get more of what you don't like? In a year, 2 years, or 5 years, you could find that most of the time you're doing things you really like, and very little of the time are you doing things you don't like. And that's what a purposeful life looks like.
And thus the scenery changed.
The scenery changed, but it changed very minutely in the beginning. It was just identifying one thing that excited you and then building one activity around it.
And what I find too is when you find your purpose, it makes it so abundantly clear that you can say yes to all the things that matter and no to everything else, because now you've already separated that. That's good stuff right there.
And I correct you by saying you don't, again, only this has to do with the words, right? All I say is, again, you don't find your purpose, you build it and create it. So it's a very active thing, but you do have to identify some of those purpose anchors so you know what to build around.
Absolutely. What else would you like to talk about? Maybe that's in the book.
Well, I think it's key to realize that this is a really active process. It's something you have to work at. So figuring out what purpose looks like in your life and building a life of purpose are actually fairly straightforward. It's not as confusing as people think it is, but it's going to take work. It's going to be uncomfortable. Like you're going to have to do something different. And whenever you set out to do something different, it by nature places you in an uncomfortable place because you've never been there before.
Yeah.
But change can be uncomfortable, but that's also when you grow. And so the idea is it's going to take action. Like you're going to have to see past the lack of courage is what I usually say. Because again, it's probably not time and it's probably not money that's holding you back. It's probably courage. You're going to have to be courageous and try something new.
You talk about the big P with anxiety and little P's that make up the big P.
So remember when I was talking about, I was promoting the book, Taking Stock. I was giving these talks and telling people you had to put purpose before you built your financial framework. Right. People would come up to me at the end of these talks all angry and they'd be like, I have no idea what my purpose is. It makes me anxious. When people came to me with this conclusion, this idea, I was like, well, that makes no sense because I know purpose is supposed to be really good for you. So I went and I did a bunch of research. I looked at the literature and I found two things that seem to contradict each other. One is that purpose is associated with health, happiness, and longevity. Tons of studies that show this. Less heart attacks, less strokes, better health. Generally, you do much better. On the other hand, I found other studies, specifically one by Larissa Rainey, that showed up to 91% of people at some point in their life have something called purpose anxiety. This idea that trying to find your purpose causes you to be anxious, frustrated, and depressed. 91% of people at some point in life. So this was a paradox. How could purpose be both the most important thing, but also incredibly anxiety provoking? What I realized is that we get purpose wrong. We think of it as one thing, but it's probably two things. One of them is really good for us, and it's associated with that health, happiness, longevity. One is probably more associated with anxiety. So I call these little P purpose and big P purpose. Big P purpose is the bad one. It's associated with anxiety, and big P purpose is very goal-oriented. So it's very big and audacious because, you know, in the United States, we say, if you can think it, you can build it. So this is the 7-figure business. This is becoming president. This is having the 6-pack abs. The problem with all those kind of things is to have and to succeed at big P purpose, you have to be the right person at the right time, saying the right things with the right genetics and a whole lot of luck. And most of us don't have that. So it's very scarcity mindset oriented because most people fail. It's all or nothing. You either become president of the United States or you lose. And there's nothing in between. It's so goal-oriented that it actually makes people frustrated and anxious, and usually you fail. And so that's big purpose, and that's the one that makes us feel bad. Little p purpose, on the other hand, doesn't really concern itself with goals. It concerns itself with the process. How many things could you do that excite you and light you up while you're doing them, regardless of whether you accomplish something or not? Unlike big P purpose, little p purpose is abundant. There's a million things you could do. It's not all or nothing, because someone else can pursue their little p purpose and you can, and it's not winner takes all. Everyone can do it and we can all succeed. And so this is very abundant as opposed to scarcity mindset oriented. And so when we change from pursuing big P purpose to starting to pursue little p purpose, we find all the anxiety is peeled away and we get a lot of the benefits from it. Now, society is geared towards big P purpose. Like if you look at social media, you have all these influencers and marketers. They're trying to sell us their version of big P purpose because they want to make money by trying to convince us that we have to wear the nicest clothes, travel to all the countries in the world, run the 7-figure business, and have the six-pack abs. Most of us can't do those things, so we're going to be frustrated. But they try to sell us that version of purpose because usually they make money off it.
Is there a difference between older doctors and younger doctors? Talk to us about this. And maybe let's start with the younger doctor first. So let's say the younger doctor's through med school, he's out and he's arrived, but he's finding out some of those little P's aren't aligning to where he might have thought before he got to where he is. What would you say to a doctor like that?
Well, that's actually pretty straightforward. You are a young doctor. You just started practicing. You're not going to walk away from your practice. But you can develop those purpose anchors and start building some activities around them. So maybe you do that on a Saturday or Sunday. Maybe you do that during a lunch break. What do you love to do? What lights you up? And let's start building some activities around it. I'm a perfect example of this. As a young doctor, I loved writing. It had nothing to do with being a doctor. And so I started a medical blog back in 2002 or 2003, and I'd write at nights or during my lunch break. But here's what's magical. As I started liking medicine less and less and started liking writing more and more, all of a sudden opportunities started to come up. In fact, a medical website wrote me, they had read my blog and they said, how would you like to blog for our medical website? We'll pay you $500 a month. So all of a sudden, I actually was able to integrate that into my career, and I could give up some clinical activities because now I was making money doing writing, which was my little P purpose, which I thought had nothing to do with medicine. But it started to creep into my career because I was doing this thing that lit me up. And because it lit me up, I showed up as my best self. And so I created some fairly quality work, and other people noticed that work and wanted to work with me.
That's beautiful.
And so the key is, if you don't love your job, if you don't love your life, whether you're young or old or whoever you are, start trying to figure out what your little P purpose looks like and just build a little bit of it into your life. Maybe that's 30 minutes once a week. It doesn't have to do anything with your job. But when you start getting rid of time that you're not using well and replacing it with things that light you up, you're starting to win the game. And the more you do that and the more you develop, it starts to creep into the workplace. It starts to creep into your other time periods. I've known many successful individuals who had such a strong version of purpose outside of work that it couldn't help but creep into the work. And their jobs over years transformed because people saw how good they were at this and they found ways to incorporate it into their job. I've seen this over and over again.
And you can definitely tell the difference, the before and after. So a doctor that says, well, is it too late for me? Obviously, in this discussion we're talking about, it's never too late, right?
I deal with people on their deathbeds who are still talking about their regrets. And let me tell you, in the weeks they have left, we try to help them assuage those regrets in any way we can. And so you wanted to be a pro basketball player? Well, maybe we can call Make-A-Wish Foundation and Michael Jordan will come visit you. You feel bad about a relationship that didn't work? Maybe we can help give you the courage to find that person and resolve some things before you die. You wanted to write that great memoir and you never did? Maybe we get a transcriptionist in and you tell them your life story and we bind it in a book for you. So we even do those kind of things for people on their deathbeds when they have days, weeks, or months.
Yeah, beautiful.
I don't care if you're 60 years old. I don't care if you're 70 years old. I don't care if you're 40 years old. It is never too late. The time it's too late, is when you're on your deathbed and you no longer have the energy or time left. A lot of people now have way more time and energy and even wealth than they realize. The excuse comes still down to courage. It's hard to face these things. It's hard to try doing something new. But now is the time, regardless of where you are.
I couldn't have said it better. And it all comes right back to full circle. What would you like to tell our doctors if you had some closing remarks?
So I want to make it simple. Purpose is abundant and it's straightforward. I used to think when people told me about finances and financial independence, because I didn't understand it, I thought it was the most complicated thing ever. And then this guy, Jim Daly, sent me his book. I read his book and I'm like, oh my God, this is so straightforward. I totally understand it. But until I read that book, I didn't understand. Well, I want to tell you, purpose is the same thing. It feels so ephemeral and difficult, and we struggle with it so much. But I'm here to tell you it's straightforward and abundant. You got to know the steps. But the steps are straightforward. Figure out what little P purpose looks like in your life. Figure out what your purpose anchors are, and then start building a life of purpose around it. Do those things, and you're going to find yourself feeling a lot less stuck.
Yes, love it. Make sure you check out the Purpose Code. We like to read the materials of our guests, and I got to tell you, whether you have an MD behind your name or not, this is a great book. It's a great read. And like I said, as we started the podcast, you nailed it on purpose. So I appreciate you doing that. Thank you for joining us today. I appreciate your time.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. That's our podcast for today. And remember, if you're not working on your personal wealth, who is? Please share this podcast with your friends and colleagues, and make sure you subscribe, like, and share. Any questions about what you heard today, please send an email to kdsullivan@lpl.com. Physician Wealth Meds, wealth medicine for doctors.